Joe Goche. I work for a company called Offender Watch. I work for a company called Watch Systems. Our product is Offender Watch. And what we're here today to do is to outline a proactive program that the sheriff has been using now for about 3 years. Sheriff Wilson has taken a very proactive approach to managing offenders, and what I mean by that is, and we'll go into kind of some of the history of how this started. With the Adam Walsh legislation that was signed into law by President Bush in 2006, it required that really the spirit of the law was to try and homogenize some of the management practices that go on from state to state to state. And the idea was each state kind of has become its own silo of offenders. So these are our guys, and over here in Alabama, these are their, and then you got Florida and South Carolina. The problem is with the mobile nature of offenders, if you don't have a system that allows law enforcement to communicate across those lines, both within the state, across jurisdictional lines, but also out of state, offenders tend to be, they fall through the cracks. And so South Carolina may say, well, I thought he moved to Georgia, and Georgia said, well, he never showed up. Well, then where is it? So nationwide, we've got about 5,000 different agencies, law enforcement agencies, that are using Offender Watch. We're in 42 states now, and Georgia is surrounded by Offender Watch users. So if they move in from Alabama or Florida or South Carolina, Tennessee's not on the system yet, but Mason and I were just talking, we get offenders that move in from New York. And because New York is a very paper-based system, a lot of times the offenders show up here, and Sergeant Brewer has no way of knowing where'd you come from, what are you here to register for, where are you going to. There's none of that. You have a guy standing across the counter from you, and you have no idea what he's doing here. So with New York and with South Carolina, I think it's the same. Because those states are on the same system, when that offender registered in South Carolina and said, I'm moving to Lafayette, Georgia, Mason knew immediately because he got a message through Offender Watch that said, this guy's coming. So not only did he know he was coming, he knew the time frame that he was supposed to appear in. And when the offender did come in, all Sergeant Brewer has to do is import that record from one database to another. So it greatly reduced the amount of time that it took to register. But the good thing is that if the offender hadn't shown up, both South Carolina and Georgia knew it because they were in the loop, they're on the same system. So Sheriff Wilson looked at the system about 3 years ago and knew that it represented really the best practices of what it would take to not only meet his statutory requirement from a state law perspective, but also go far above and beyond what it took to keep the citizens safe. And what do I mean when I say that? There's this much information that the state says you must, or the law says you must maintain on offenders. Sheriff Wilson is capturing about this much. And it's because Offender Watch is also an investigative tool. So where do offenders, where do their associates live? Who do they hang out with? What vehicles do they drive? What's their email address? What's their phone number? Those sorts of things will help you find offenders when they fail to register at this office. Without capturing that additional data, it's very, very difficult and very time consuming to say, where do we even start looking? All right, well, we know his next of kin lives here, and he's got a girlfriend that lives here, and some of his buddies live here, and this is the vehicle that he drives, and these are the vehicles that they drive. Let's start there. So without a system that does that, if an offender does something, harms a citizen, harms a child, Sheriff Wilson's office has way more data to begin mining and putting reports together, mapping those locations to where they can try and find this offender. Without this system, there is no other way of doing that. Okay, so that's kind of the history and some of the investigative tools that we talked about. The reason that we're here now is because Halloween's coming up. Okay, one of the additional benefits of Offender Watch is it also provides the sheriff with a website that you're looking at here. You can go to WalkerCountySO.com, right? WalkerSO.com, and look for the link that says sex offender, and it will bring you right to the sheriff's webpage. By law, the sheriff is statutorily required to maintain a webpage and to notify the public. Okay, so with Offender Watch, with all the investigative tools that we just talked about, Watch Systems and Offender Watch also provides that website for the sheriff, and it's a seamless integration. So as soon as Sergeant Brewer changes an address on offender in Offender Watch, that new address posts to the website. and it's a real-time change. There's nobody that has to go in and edit that information. Also with the web page comes email alerts, so the citizens can log in. You see where it says search for offenders, where my mouse is. So you have a couple of options there. You can search for offenders around your address, so within a radius of your address. You can search for offenders by name. You can search by city. You can see all the non-compliant offenders. And then you can also, this is a brand new search feature where you can say, okay, show me, I'll give you an example. I get home, my wife said this guy has been calling and hanging up this phone number. And I'll look at it and say, well, I don't know who that phone number is. So I can actually put that phone number into Offender Watch now and search. And what the search is going to come back, it's either going to say, we have that record in our database, which is exactly what this says. So what that should tell the citizens is that, hey, this is a phone number that belongs to somebody that's registered at the sheriff's office. Contact the sheriff's office and get more details that way. It does not tell you who the phone number belongs to. It also does the same thing with email addresses. So if I'm looking at my daughter's inbox and I say, I don't recognize that email address, I can do the same thing with emails and search. Now, that only works because this office collects more information than it has to collect, and it has the tools to do it. So there is no system that's going to connect your public website with the database that you have here, marry the two, and allow citizens to search the sheriff's website and receive limited returns back. Okay, there is no other system that does this. So in addition to searching for offenders, why don't I do that? Why don't I put an address in where I know there's, give me a good address, Mason.
Put the sheriff's office in 105 South Big Street.
And this is it?
30728.
30728. So now what I'm doing is I'm saying, show me all of the offenders that live near this address. And because we also provide mapping capabilities with our program, what you're going to see is a map pull up. You have the ability to change the radius. You see where my cursor is here? You can change that from a 1/4 mile out to 2 miles. And then what you're going to have here is a list of all the offenders that live within a 2-mile address of where we are right now. And I'll show you exactly how you can get more information on each one of those. Now the important thing is 105 South Duke Street, we do what's called geocoding addresses. So we've got a program that's proprietary to Watch Systems that we know exactly where every single address in this county is. And we can therefore take that address with an X, Y, lat long coordinates and put it on a map and say, we know that's exactly where this person is. We're the only company that does that as well. So without knowing that this address is here and this address is here, there's no way that I can draw a 2-mile radius around this address and say, these are all, it just doesn't work, okay? So you'll see off to the left, I've got a list of all these offenders, and I can open any record I want and get more details on that offender. Now, if you notice, there's a big section with scars, marks, and tattoos. And I just happened to stumble across the right one. That's also additional information that this office collects that it's not statutorily required to collect. With the nature of crimes being against children, they have a very difficult time giving they would have a difficult time giving a description of you, of me, of the sheriff, of Sergeant Brewer, but the one thing that they can identify is tattoos. And they can say the guy had pictures on his arms. What do the pictures look like? Well, they're saying it's tattoos. But that's the mapping and being able to go back and forth between an address that you want to see where offenders live. So the next thing that you can do is actually register for email alerts, and that's what we want the citizens to do, is to actually go to the sheriff's website, walkerso.com, click on sex offenders. You'll get to this page where you can actually register for email alerts, and this is really the crux of why we're here. And that is because we want people registering as many addresses as possible, because we also send out proactive, the sheriff sends out proactive emails to the citizens. So anytime a citizen moves within 2 miles of that address, I get an email from the sheriff with all the information that you just saw. So I can register where we live, where my wife works, where my kids go to school. My grandmother lives by herself, so I can register her address. My sister lives by herself. So anytime an offender moves anywhere near any one of my families, I get an email alert from the sheriff. And that's vastly different from any other program that you, and that's the important thing, is everyone has a right to privacy, but their right to privacy shouldn't bump up or cross or intercede our right to keep the citizens, to keep my family safe, and the sheriff's right to keep the citizens of his county safe. So the reason that we're launching this so far in front of Halloween is because when the sheriff gets an email, he's going to tell 3 or 4 people, and they're going to sign up, and then they're going to tell 3 or 4 people. It's a viral type of thing. So we want to get out far enough in front of Halloween to where, everyone in the city and everyone in the county knows that they're going to get emails from the sheriff. Now, what I would like to also show you is on the sheriff's website, and these are safety tips that the sheriff himself made available. You see the button that says safety tips. I'm going to show. Yeah, I'm going to show them. With the light bulb that says safety tips, there are safety tips for Halloween. There's safety tips for Girl Scouts selling cookies door to door. I'll give you a perfect example of why that is. I was coming back from lunch with the sheriff. We went through a neighborhood. There was a white Suburban going real slow. The Suburban stopped. Mom's on the phone. Doors open out, and Girl Scouts scattered, going to sell their cookies. But the mom is still on the phone, not knowing what neighborhood she's in really. How long do you think it would take for a predator to open the door, grab one of those kids, and you never see her again? That's exactly what happened to Megan Kanko with Megan's Law. Because the guy said, "Oh, I have a puppy inside. You want to see?" Yeah. And this guy actually helped the mother search for her, knowing that she was dead in his house the whole time. It happens all over the place. So the one that I'd like to show you that we've already got pulled up is right here. Yeah. This is for Halloween. Now the schools can go to the sheriff's website and print these out. You can print these out for your neighborhood if you have a neighborhood watch type of situation in your community. The bottom line is, go to the sheriff's website, print a map of the neighborhood that you're going to be trick-or-treating in, and know where all the registered offenders are in your neighborhood. Without Offender Watch and without the sheriff taking the proactive stance that he took 3 years ago, there is no way to get this information out to the public. And that's really, that's the ins and outs of how the system came to be. What are the benefits of using it internally for an investigation? The communication that it allows across jurisdictional lines. So Sergeant Brewer can communicate with almost 50 other counties in Georgia that use the same program, but he has communicated with jurisdictions in California that have offenders moving back and forth, from New York, from South Carolina. You can't do that unless everyone's on the same page, and that's what we do at Watch. And thankfully, that's what Sheriff Wilson's doing here in Walker County. So I'll take any questions that you guys have. I talked a lot, but if anybody has any questions about what we're doing here.
I'm sort of interested in how offenders, we know how they get on the system. How do they get off the system? When they've done their jail time, when they're through with probation, or are they there for life?
No, well, that's a good question. In some states, they're on for life. In some states, they're not on for life. In some states, depending on the level of the offense that they either committed or were convicted, they have to register for 25 years, 15 years, or 5 years. Every state is different. And the really neat thing, and something I'll show you in just a second, is within Offender Watch we have all 50 states, their crime codes. So if Sergeant Brewer is importing someone from Florida or from California, he doesn't have to spend time looking up and seeing what's the equivalent here in Georgia. It's already in the system for him. All he has to do is check it. So right there, because we spend a tremendous amount of time not only learning what the state laws and requirements are, but they change. I think you said they change, I mean, overnight, you've got new laws in new states. So we've got a whole department that is just studying law and making sure that Offender Watch reflects that.
Is Georgia's law on that, is it real complicated, or
Gary,
is it?
there's actually 4 separate laws in the state of Georgia that deal with the registration of sex offenders. Basically goes back to the crime commit dates. If the crime was committed before January 3rd, 2003, they do not have residency restrictions. As an example, we have one here who actually lives behind Lafayette, North Lafayette Elementary School. I get calls, once every 2 or 3 months I get a call, hey, this guy's up here at the school, da 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 da, and I have to tell him, I'm sorry, they changed the law in 2010, he can live there. I don't like it any more than anybody else does, and I have children that go there myself. But it breaks it down into what the registration restrictions are between June 3rd, 2003 to June 4th, 2006. It's this, they're restricted from living custody to child care schools, stuff like that, and then it steps up and gets more progressive. Anything after July 1st, 2008, I believe it is, they're restricted from living in the house of either school, church, daycare, areas minors congregate.
Does it differentiate by offense in
No.
Georgia? No.
Georgia's a lifetime registration state.
Okay.
We may have an offender who's moving here from, well, Tennessee, they have a 10-year registration period on some of their crimes. We have had some of those people move here, and when I start explaining it to them, they're like, you mean I have to register for life in Georgia? Yes, sir, you do. They quickly move back out of our state, so that's one less person we don't have to
Now, the
deal with.
difference is, Mason said something I want everybody to catch, and it's when the crime was committed, not when the individual was convicted. And that is that has created another hurdle, is because these guys, they don't all necessarily know or have the paperwork in front of them when the act was committed. So there's a ton of, I got to go to the court records, I've got to go to DOC, I've got to go. It's a ton of backtrack work just to find out when the crime was committed. Meanwhile, the guy sitting at your desk, you know, he's wanting to know, can I live here or not? Well, I don't know. So what we've been doing with Offender Watch is interfacing with as many different databases as possible, to where we can grab that information and actually populate that information for the deputies, so that it's there in front of them when they come in to register. I can't imagine trying to have to go to a courthouse and get records and everything else while the guy's sitting there trying to register with them. So there was another thing that I'll show you when that's off. I'll show you a couple of things, just so you know. There's some information that I want to show you that we're capturing that's not public knowledge. So unless any other questions about what we're doing, why we're doing it. I want to make one point very clear. The Georgia sheriffs, there's 159 of them that know exactly where these offenders are. And it's because they've taken a proactive stance. Sheriff Wilson didn't have to go out and buy a system like this. He didn't have to maintain it. He didn't have to provide websites and notifications this detailed. But because he is, this community in this county is safer. So I've enjoyed working with Sheriff Wilson for the last 3 years now, and hope to continue doing so.